All right, welcome back to Code It Live, our channel here. Good afternoon again if you're in Europe, good evening if you're in Asia, and North America is just waking up.
It's morning, yeah.
It's morning.
Morning back home.
Yes, so we are live here from a conference called Swetugg here in beautiful Stockholm.
Mm-hmm.
Second day, we had great content over 2 days, lots of speakers, lots of friends that we know, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, I had a good time. We just over lunch did a .NET Rocks Live with Stacey Cashmore, which is always fun. I mean, people get to see the sort of
how the sausage is being made.
Yes, the plumbing of making a podcast.
Right. So let me formally introduce our guest, none other than Richard Campbell.
Well,
of
hello.
.NET Rocks fame, the voice that wakes you up and inspires you.
I've also heard the people using like my Geek Out episodes where I do most of the talking as things to put babies to sleep. So I don't know how I feel about that, but it is what it is.
You have a calming voice.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about something that I know you are passionate about for the last few years. As the tech industry, as our generation kind of grows up in this industry, we may not always remember the things that we have been through, or maybe the next generation of young developers coming up. There has been a lot of churn in the Microsoft space, and .NET in particular has gone through a huge set of evolutions.
Well, yeah. I mean, you talk about a product built for enterprise developers to make Windows apps to what it is today.
Right. So I think what you are doing is incredibly valuable. You're trying to document the history of .NET.
Yeah.
So tell us where you started and why you thought this was important.
The inspiration came in 2017, which was the 15th anniversary of .NET shipping.
That's true.
And I was involved with a party in Redmond. And if you go watch Channel 9, you'll see these. I did about a 20 or so 5-minute vignette, little videos that were happy birthday .NET.
Right.
And with a lot of folks that some had actually retired from Microsoft at that point,
That's
some
true.
that were still working there. And it was one of those things where, I mean, I obviously lived it and was making .NET Rocks through most of it. And so I knew a lot of the stories. You know, I'm a storyteller by trade. And,
Yes, you are.
You know, the average engineer is not. And even these extraordinary people, like they think very differently about the things that they make, and their relationship to it was different.
Right.
And so we were, you know, kind of sharing their own stories with themselves and with me. People got to see that. But I came out of the experience thinking, boy, if we don't write this down soon, it's going to go missing. Like we're going to lose it. And that. But I get a lot of crazy ideas. Like I took my time sort of getting into that. I did some test material, did some different talks and so forth. And then the next sort of gate was, well, if I'm going to do this, who do you have to have? Like, are you not credible if you haven't talked to, Scott Guthrie or Anders Halsberg or Jason Zander or Brian Harry, like just sort of essential people to the origin story, at least of .NET. And I mean, the good fortune for me making .NET Rocks for so long is I have their email address. They'll respond to me. And so I mailed them all and just said, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And they all said yes.
Okay, so did you actually go out and talk to most of the stakeholders
Yes.
that have touched .NET over the last 15
Well,
years?
not most. That's thousands
That's a lot
of people.
of
I mean, I have talked to dozens, maybe
okay.
over 40 now.
Wow.
It's over 100 hours worth of interviews. I think it's really important. And when I tell pieces of the story, it's like, listen, when I talk about an individual, I'm talking about an individual that has hundreds of people behind them that actually made these things. Like it is a lot of folks that worked on .NET over the years.
Yeah. And maybe with .NET, we also kind of saw the Microsoft that we know from 10 years back evolving into what it is today.
Yeah.
The whole pivot towards open source. That didn't happen overnight.
No, there's still pieces of Microsoft that are not open source to this day, and may never be, and it's not required, right? Like, it is what it is. The push towards open source happens in the early aughts, right? And when you think about when Scott Guthrie hired Scott Guthrie's Ninja Army, which is what we called it, not what he called it, but that was all in the same month. Essentially, he hired Phil Hack, Rob Connery, Scott Hanselman. There was a lot of these folks that were strong in the open source community, and he was showing them the prototype of MVC. as sort of the motivation to say, look, we're building this new tool that we're going to do open source from the very beginning. It was going to come out on Codeplex. And would you help us, make this a success?
Right.
That was sort of the motivation, and that's in 2007, a long time before, open source would really grab on. I would say that, that's an important milestone, but there were other folks that were already pressing against the idea of open source earlier than that. That's why Codeplex already existed at that time. And, your next big jump is in 2010 when Studio 2010 ships and jQuery's in the box.
All right.
With the MIT license. Because Microsoft had been doing open source projects via Codeplex with the MSPL license, their own sort of custom license, which was not that different than an MIT license, really. But it was a Microsoft license. Right. Everybody was like, well, why? Why would you do this? Right? And that comes from legal folks at Microsoft not quite understanding the open source community and why these consistent licenses are important. And they were serious. Like at the time when they were starting to put the package together, and this will be in the book, there was a push to use the MSPL license on jQuery. I know it's something that was already licensed onto something else, and there was a big furor around that. It's like, this is a mistake. We will be in trouble with the community if we do this. And they won the day. It went out with the MIT license on it.
Okay. Yeah, and how things have changed.
Part of that is that there's a point, and I think the pivotal moment is in 2013 when Microsoft actually becomes the cloud company. Where now the focus of the company, Win 8 has not gone well. The cloud is clearly growing. And there's a moment where where Azure becomes more important than Windows.
Yes.
And as soon as that's true, where code comes from that runs on the cloud is irrelevant. Right. Any code is good code. And licensing code isn't important per se either. And so you see this big movement then towards, well, we can use open source for all of these things for ourselves. And then you see the cultural shifts where actually that GitHub approach to building software, that sort of in the open, interacting with your customers, in your team doing those interactions directly, just makes for a better product. Everybody's happier. And that shifted them wholesale. And then for certain teams, it moves very rapidly after that.
Right. So, in your experience of talking to .NET stakeholders, which clearly have done a lot of, there were missteps along the way.
Oh, plenty.
So, were there folks who were critical of those mistakes, or did they take those steps to learn things about how well or how better to work things? Well,
I firmly believe in the idea that everybody comes to work wanting to do the right thing.
Right.
And they don't, but it's not everything that they understand, or necessarily all of the motivations and all of the complexity. A company like Microsoft is a big, big company. But it's interesting to see that there were moments in that transformative day when they're trying to figure out what to do with .NET. And Pressy and the leadership has actually figured out it needs to be open source. But I think the folks that were working on it, they'd been convinced that they couldn't do that. And so there's actually a meeting where they're presenting the idea that maybe we need to re-engineer .NET to be more centric to the cloud. And the leadership actually says to them, you need to think bigger. And they're basically implying, like, they want them to say, we want to make it all open source. But they want them to come to that conclusion too. They want them all bought in. They're not going to order them to make an open source project. And so they have to go back and think for a while and then come back and go, could we open source the whole thing? Like, yes, we think that's a great idea. Do that. And then you have this realization. It's like, we're going to re-engineer .NET with the intent that it would run on any platform, anything that can run in the cloud, and it'll be open source all the way up and down.
Yeah. So let's talk about experiences. And there are plenty of characters in the whole .NET story. So anything or anybody that kind of caught you a little off guard, surprises that you didn't expect to hear from?
I was hoping all along that I would meet people I didn't know. Making 1,600 or so .NET Rocks episodes, you've met a lot of people.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of obvious names. But one of the folks I'd never spoken to before that absolutely blew my mind was a lady by the name of Maoni Stevens. And she's a little more visible now than she was when I first talked to her. But she took over the garbage collector from Patrick Dessaud. Patrick Dessaud did the original implementation, was involved very early on, and is essentially retired now. He works once in a while still, but not very much. And Maoni leads the GC team going forward, and very soft-spoken, incredibly intelligent. Like just you're talking about someone who is the principle behind the multi-threaded, multi-core garbage collector. Like, this is not a trivial piece of software. Like, even someone as brilliant as Miguel de Gaza said when they open sourced .NET, the first thing I'm going to look like is the garbage collector. And so, but she's also used to being the only one in the room that understands what the heck she does. Right. And so it took her a while to sort of warm up in the interview to what I wanted to, trying to understand and sort of dive into that. But just amazing. Like, this, I can't tell you how many more people are like that. Like, this, to be comfortable, having conversations in public and to present stuff and so forth, that's anomalous. Normal is kind of keeping to yourself,
of course,
and not being comfortable with those things. So in some ways, I think Maoni's way more normal than a lot of other people that we work with anyway. But I'm just so happy that I had a chance to meet her and to talk through that story, make sure it's part of the history.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Miguel, which, Xamarin and everybody is in a happy place, but, there were some rough times.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
And as .NET got out in the open, the rest of the ecosystem, which has been open, they had plenty of things to learn.
Sure.
And maybe assimilate. So anything you can share?
Well, part of that was the whole .NET standard was a process of, we have different versions of .NET, both inside of Microsoft and outside of Microsoft. Right. And they're not going to magically consolidate. But can we at least be pulling in the same direction so that developers don't get punished for the fact that we have multiple instances?
Right.
That's what standard was really about. It was actually for the builders of these different implementations of framework and languages so that a developer could move easily between them. If you code for .NET Standard 2 and you need to hop over to Xamarin, it's going to work. It's going to, there's going to be some different libraries, but at least the language syntax is right and the properties are the same, like those kinds of things. But that's not easy to do. People need to change.
Yeah.
Stuff that works needs to be modified, like that. And so there's a lot of, which version are we going to use? Everybody's pretty sure it's going to be theirs.
Right.
But that's never true, right? So there is a sort of inflection point where they all have to get around a table and agree, all right, well, for this particular set of behaviors, what are we going to use? Or should we make something new, and that's going to be the standard going forward?
Gotcha. Okay, Roslin.
Yes.
That kind of evolved interestingly. Any things you can share again?
Well, in .NET Rocks, we knew about Roslin very early on. And there's a sort of a principle in building languages where your language is mature when you can build a parser for your language in your language, which is beautifully recursive. And the original version of C# was written in C++. And one would argue, maybe for too long, that enough versions came along that by the time there was sort of this, we really should get to that problem of build it in itself, there were enough users of it that you now had to, you concern yourself with bugs. Like, there are unusual behaviors, you could call them bugs, that people depend on, that in a different built version of this, it's not going to behave the same.
Right. And
so on .NET Rocks, we talked to folks that work on Roslin. It's like, this feels like fusion power. Like, it's just 5 years away. It's just like it was never going to ship. It persisted a really long time. And I have a great story that Anders Halsberg himself told me, that'll again be part of the book, where what pushed Roslin over the edge, where we have to get this done, is as IntelliSense and Telcode got smarter and smarter, they realized they were essentially building two versions of the compiler. The one that ran inside of Visual Studio and did the code analysis for you, all the squiggly lines and so forth, and the version you compiled your app on. And if you ever had a bug where the two behave differently, where the Visual Studio is indicating the code's correct, but the compiler barfs on it, that's not a good day. And so this compiler as a service finally founded itself in that solution. Like, this is why we can justify it. But at no point in those days was there any conversation about open source and cross-platform. Like, that actually comes later to Roslin. So that by the time we get to build 2014, when Anders gets to walk out and literally hit the button to deploy it to GitHub, that's the point at which he had done that. A lot of work had been done years earlier that made this compiler building compiler as a service model work. So it's a very long project, a convoluted project. And I strongly suspect there's going to be folks using .NET now who've only ever used the Roslin compilers. They've always had, the code eye concepts and all of that ability for the compiler to sort of insert itself at any point and give you information that we just didn't have 10 years ago.
Yeah. All right. So this is obviously an incredible story. When can we expect this? Where are you?
Well, that's a great question, isn't it there, Sam? Yeah. I'm pretty sure I said I have it done last year. And
it's no small ask.
No.
So where are you?
I am ready. I have pieces written. I have additional research still needs to go. I have agreed to some excerpts going to come out soon.
Okay.
So probably in the next few months. We'll probably start building a mailing list as well. I'm considering a Kickstarter. So folks who want to order in advance, we can make some specialty products, maybe do a tour. Because I'm pretty comfortable going around and telling people stories. So I'm happy to do that. But I would like to have it in everybody's hands for Christmas this year.
Oh, okay. All right.
That would be my goal.
All right. Wonderful. So any parting thoughts for .NET developers as we kind of step into a new decade? We have plenty of history to look back at. Anything that you are really looking forward to as to how this ecosystem evolves?
Well, we are in an interesting inflection point in our industry, right? Our hardware is going to change. Moore's law is ending, right? This is the decade where we run out of atoms. You really can't make transistors any smaller like that. We're going to hit that limit. Mm-hmm. And so architecture is going to shift. But we as .NET developers are protected from that. Right? There is a team at Microsoft and in GitHub that builds the runtime that absorbs the differences in the different processes and the different architectures and so forth. So as long as we're on the current versions, no matter what happens to hardware in the next few years, we should be able to take advantage of it without rewriting our code. And I think the client side is also true. We're ripe for disruption of the smartphone. Maybe it's the HoloLens-like device, like some kind of device, or maybe it's something else. But UX stuff is just a library. Right. Again, .NET is very well positioned. I think Microsoft's done the work. So we sit in this intermediary layer between hardware, cloud, and connectivity and different user interfaces that people need, that we should be able to take our skills forward no matter what comes.
Right. Yeah, and we don't know, but I think what we are looking for is the next socially acceptable human-computer interaction.
Well, we make what's socially acceptable. For a long time, carrying a smartphone around was not socially acceptable until you realize everybody does it. Yeah. It's only when the product is compelling enough that it supersedes conventional norms that it wins. Right? Smartphone won when your friend said, "Hey, can I see that?" and then wouldn't give it back to you. Mm-hmm. When the goggles are so good that when you show it to somebody else, they won't give it back to you, that's when things change.
Right. You're right. Okay, so folks, you obviously know where to find Richard Campbell. I am incredibly excited and looking forward to History of .NET coming out, and I think it's a story that we can tell our kids.
I hope so.
It's going to be amazing. All right, folks, that's it from us for now. Again, we want to talk to a few more speakers here. Hopefully the day is starting out right in North America, so please keep tuning in, and we'll have much more. Richard, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us. We appreciate that. And okay, bye for now.